Okay. Okay.
Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Okay, so this is our fifth and final talk on the Bhagavad Gita. The primary focus has been, although of course I strayed off in many different directions, the main focus was, is there something practical about Advaita Vedanta? Is it merely just an intellectual exercise, or is there some practical thing in ordinary life? So I spent some time trying to say that the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to give us a practical way to live a life that would lead ultimately to that wisdom, that knowledge about our true nature. That's the purpose of Karma Yoga, to make you fit enough to understand this Vedantic teaching, that your nature is immortal, eternal bliss. That's the topic, that the self is unborn, undying, unchanging, ever present. And that Karma Yoga just means everything that assists you in attaining that knowledge. That's what Karma Yoga is. If you dig down into the nitty-gritty, then there's much to be said. But as a general idea, if you can make your life into something that is conducive to that type of discriminative wisdom, anything that does that, that purifies your mind, is an aid, is an auxiliary aid. It spiritualizes the mind, and to that extent, Karma Yoga is not to be separated from the Vedanta. It's not like there's a Vedantic teaching and that's separate from our lives. We can live anyway and understand the Vedantic teaching. The idea is that only the one who has purified their minds sufficiently, they are the ones who are capable of understanding this teaching. That's the idea. So that Karma Yoga and the knowledge of the self are not two separate things. They both lead to the same result, one in stages and one directly. Karma Yoga in stages, knowledge releases you immediately. So this class will be somewhat of a review, a discussion of something that is after Karma Yoga, in fact. What is that? Just so that we know what the goal is. The goal is not Karma Yoga. The goal is realizing myself that never does any action, the actionless self. And the means to realize that, the Gita says, is through living your life as an ignorant person. You have a life and you're living it. To make that into a spiritual practice, there's a way to do it. So I said, there was that verse, I believe it was 247, where he says, the first stage is do your duty. That means work. Engage in the world. Don't withdraw from the world. That's the teaching of the Gita. Not to become a renunciate. Engage in the world. Second step is when you engage in the world, the mind will be quite active. That's called rajas. To overcome that, if you can act in the world with the mind orientated towards the Supreme, that inner, towards that. When I say towards that, I mean your true self, the witnessing consciousness in you. That's what's called the Lord or the Supreme Self, as opposed to the ego. In that one self, because of ignorance, I've taken myself to be this form, this collection of body, mind, and senses. And from that point of view, the witness is called the Supreme Self. He is different than me because I'm a doer, I'm limited, I was born, that's unborn, that pervades, the witness pervades everything. I don't pervade everything. So I'm an individual and there is a Supreme Being. In our ignorance, we imagine this distinction between the Supreme Self and the little self. And the little self is the one that does actions, the one who's in ignorance. So that person, by doing their actions with the attitude turned towards that Supreme Being, then that very action becomes a karma yoga. It's yoked to that. And what is the fruit of karma yoga? Purification of the mind to make the instrument fit enough to discriminate. Because when I say discriminate, I mean it gives it the capacity to renounce all actions. When you see that I am not the body, mind, senses, or ego, that's called renunciation of all actions. That it's the body, the mind, the senses that's acting. But myself, I am unchanging. I never do anything. That's called the renunciation of actions. Seeing the self as actionless that's the real sannyasa. There's no other way to renounce actions except to see yourself as ever free from actions. So this karma yoga is meant to purify the mind sufficiently so that it can do this type of discrimination called buddhi, the discriminative faculty of the mind that can discriminate what is self, what is not self, what is changing, what is unchanging, what is appearing and what is disappearing and what is staying. This type of discrimination is called buddhi. And for that intellect to be one-pointedly focused on that is really what's called meditation. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. So I don't know how many of you have the actual Shankara commentary on the Gita, but it's interesting. For the 6th chapter, after he's talked a lot about karma yoga, he gets up to the 6th chapter, and in his introduction to the 6th chapter, he says that this chapter is for someone who's already done the karma yoga, who has purified the mind enough to know that I do no karma. For that person, karma yoga has served its purpose. He's no longer a karma yogi when he can realize that it's merely nature that's acting, but I am not an actor. Then karma yoga, he's not the adhikari, the student, the qualified student. His qualification now is for this 6th chapter, which is called Dhyana Yoga. It's in the Upanishads. It has other names: Adhyatma Yoga, Manonigraha Yoga, Nididhyasana. these are all synonyms for what's going to be described in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It's not too practical for us to actually study this because we're not really capable of doing it. But at least theoretically, we can appreciate that if there's a person who's gotten to this stage, what is it that they do? If they don't do karma yoga, if that served the purpose, their minds are pure, sattvic, introvert, one-pointed, what is their spiritual practice now that karma yoga has served its purpose? So in the 6th chapter, I'll move to there. I'm going to read some of these verses here just to give you the flavor of this chapter. What's the purpose of this type of meditation? How it's different from the meditation that you normally think of, mindfulness meditation, meditating on an object, meditating on a mantra, meditating on or stopping all your thoughts, or what is this particular thing? I'll try to briefly show what this is, how to do it, and what the fruit of this is, unlike meditating on a candle or a mantra, which has a purpose. Those meditations, we don't dismiss them. They have a purpose, but not the result of those is it purifies the mind. Om, Om, Om. If you could do that repetition, that japa of a particular mantra, the mind becomes quiet if you're able to do it. And that's what's required, a quiet mind. But merely a quiet mind will not bring about the knowledge of the self. So this 6th chapter, in the beginning, in the introduction, Shankara says, at the end of the preceding chapter, that's the 5th chapter, I'm reading Shankara's introduction to the 6th chapter. At the end of the 5th chapter was set forth in a very short form, what is this meditation? What is dhyana yoga? And the 6th chapter will be a commentary, an exposition of what was said in this previous chapter in the last 2 verses, 27, 28, and 29. It says, keeping out all, in the 5th chapter, 27th and 28th, they're together. It reads like this: keeping out all external contacts, fixing the eye between the eyebrows, means gazing between the eyebrows, equalizing the breaths, all the preliminaries, equalizing the breath that move in and out of the nostrils, controlling the senses, mind, and intellect, free from desire, fear, and hatred. That silent sage, that silent sage intent on liberation, he is eternally free. He attains peace on knowing me, knowing me, who is the supreme being of the whole universe. He comes to know me in truth. So that was what Shankar is referring to. So he says here that now is commenced the chapter that forms a gloss on those verses. Since the preliminary accessory of the yoga of meditation, the preliminary accessory means that in order to get yourself fit enough for this meditation is karma. doing work as yoga is the preliminary accessory for this meditation, till one becomes fit to embark upon this type of meditation. To get the fitness to do this, karma yoga is the preliminary accessory. The eligible householder, meaning the person who believes I have a house and a wife and children, and I have responsibilities, I must work. If he's worked in this way, then the mind has become pure enough for this yoga of meditation. And therefore it begins. So the objection says, why is the fitness to undertake this meditation made the limit of doing work? Aren't we supposed to do our duty and work all of our life? Why should we not do our work? Man is enjoined to do his duty, to do righteous activities. Should he just stop that? Why does this meditation the end of work? So that's a good question. And there's a whole dialogue that goes on here for pages about this question. And the conclusion is that karma yoga only takes you this far. Once it served its purpose, then it's no longer needed. The mind is fit for this meditation. Exactly what this meditation is and why does it preclude that you can now do karma yoga, I'll try to explain by reading the verses themselves. So it starts off, he who does actions, yaha karma karoti, he who does actions, not relying on the action or the fruit, not relying on ashrita, not relying on the karma palam, on the fruit of that work, he is a renouncer. He is a sannyasi. Why is he called the renouncer? Because he's renounced his desire for the fruits of his works. In that sense, he's renounced something. He is a renouncer. And he's a yogi. Why is he a yogi? Because he's joined the work to the Supreme. So that person who does karma yoga in that way, he's both a sannyasi and a yogi, a renouncer and a karma yogi. So a karma yogi, in a certain sense, is a sannyasi. He renounced the fruit of his actions. The real renouncer renounces everything. But this karma yogi is a renouncer only in the sense that at least he renounced his desire for the fruit, the karma pala, the fruit of the work. That's the first verse. Then he says, that which they call sannyasa, the renunciation of the fruit of your work, that you should know is yoga. Yoga is the renunciation of the fruit of your work. There is no yoga, na yogi bhavati. You cannot be a yogi unless asamyasta sankalpa. You haven't renounced. Now this is the second part of karma yoga. The first part is you're a yogi who's renounced the fruit of your work. The second part is it's not just the fruit of the work. You can renounce in your mind the thought to do the work, sankalpa. The very will to do it is in the mind, but you're the witness. So when you've gotten to the stage where the very thought to do the work, the very work and the fruit the one who's sannyasta in his mind, even though they're doing the works in their mind, they've renounced those. Unless you've done that, you can't be a yogi, because you'll be attached to the idea that I'm the doer, I have the desire to do the work, I'm doing the work, I'm not attached to the fruit. That can't be the real yogi. So no one can be a yogi. Na yogi bhavati asamyasta sankalpa. For someone who hasn't renounced through discrimination that I don't have any desire to do work, that's just a thought that occurs in my mind, that person, he can become a yogi, but no other one. When he's got to that stage, then work has no meaning for him anymore. When he realizes that I don't do anything, then karma yoga has served its purpose. It's merely to take you to that level. I do nothing. Even while everything is going on, apparently, I do nothing. At that stage, of course, karma yoga, if you can get to that stage, has served its purpose. Then he says, and this is a very important verse in the Gita to understand, in the 3rd verse of the 6th chapter, Ara Rukshu Muni Yogam Karma Karanamuchite. For the person who wants to ascend, to achieve, to become a yogi, he who wants to ascend to yoga, that muni usually is translated as sage, but it means mananashilaha, the one who's always reflecting, that discriminative person who's examining his own experience introspectively is called the muni. That muni who wants to ascend to yoga, karma is said to be the means. To ascend to yoga, the real yoga, there's only one yoga. To get to that, karma yoga is the means. Ada Rukshumun, the desire, the one who's desirous for that to become a yogi, a real yogi, he has to practice karma yoga. That's what this verse says. For the one who desires to ascend to yoga, karma is said to be the means. You do the action without attachment to the fruit, and then you do the action without attachment to the action or the fruit. The person who wants to ascend to that stage, the means is action, because until he gets to that stage, we must act. In our ignorance, we must act. To get to the stage where I realize I never act, karma is said to be the means. I don't know if I'm getting this point across. It seems like a stretch. What do I need karma to get to the stage of discrimination? Well, just take it that discrimination is not merely some mechanical, intellectual process and coming to some conclusion, but it's a deep introspection that reveals the truth of something directly. So in order to get to that, Ararukshu Muni Yogam, the one who wants to ascend to that stage, karma said to be the means. And then the second line says, Yoga Arudasya, for the one who has ascended to yoga, the real yoga, Yoga Arudasya, Tasya Eva, for him alone, For that yogi that was practicing karma yoga and got the antakara, the chitta shuddhi, the purified mind, for him alone, tasya eva, yoga arudasya, he's now ascended to yoga. Karma yoga is finished. Yoga arudha, he's ascended to the real yoga. Karma yoga is just yoga in a metaphorical sense because it leads to the real yoga. For the person who's ascended to yoga, who's practiced karma yoga, and who's got to that stage, shama karanamuchite. Shama. The word shama means generally quiescence, quietude, but it doesn't mean that. Shama means that that person, he's rejected all of the not self. He knows that none of this is me, that myself is ever peaceful, ever quiet, residing in that, abiding in that, discriminating that truth, seeing that truth is called Shama. The person who has that capacity, that's for the, so what this verse means is for the one who wants to get liberation, the first stage is karma. He who wants to ascend to yoga, because yoga leads directly to liberation. Yoga means the knowledge of the self. That's the true meaning of yoga. To get to that yoga, karma was said to be a means because it can purify your mind. When the mind is pure, and let me say that while you're doing the karma yoga, it doesn't mean you're not a muni. The discrimination is going on while you're doing the karma. As a karma yogi, the discriminate, and then when the mind is pure enough, you've ascended to the real yoga, then no more karma. Now the mind is on the actionless self. I do nothing, even while the karmas are going on. That's not karma yoga. Tasya eva, for him alone, means that only for the one who's done the karma yoga, who's purified the mind so that it no longer has any use for him, then shama karanamuchite, then the cause for liberation is the giving up of all actions. Shama means retreating into the self which is ever quiescent, unchanging, actionless, timeless, spaceless. So he begins with that. He says, when this sage is no longer attached to the sense objects, that they just appear and disappear to me, and he's not attached to any works. The works are going on, but I'm the witness. He discards all mental sarva sankalpa sanyasta. He gives up all sankalpas. That means I want to do this to get this, and then I'm going to enjoy that. This type of thinking is called sarva sankalpa samyasi. He's renounced all that type of thinking because now the mind is riveted on that. Even while everything is going on, the mind is on that. By the way, this is the real meaning of, in Vedanta, meditation. It really doesn't mean sitting with your back straight, equalizing the breath, bringing the mind slowly in. That's all the preliminary for the beginners. But this meditation is, the Atma Jnana Nitya, is to be going on all the time. This is not a meditation when you sit down for 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes. This is nirantaram, without end. nityam, always doing this, the capacity to do this, karma yoga gives you the capacity to do this. For this sage, who's no longer attached to the sense objects like all of us are, and is no longer attached to works, so he's no longer attached to the fruit of the works either, then he is said to have scaled to the peak of yoga. Yoga arudasya. For that person, he has no need for karma yoga. So then, we're not going to do the whole chapter, but the instructions about what are the aids to this type of practice. What is the actual practice? I don't want to jump ahead of myself, so I'll leave that for now. The preliminaries, he says, rahasi stitaha, residing in a rahasi, a secret place. That secret place means a back room in your house. A quiet place with no distractions is the rahasi stitaha. This yogi should always practice this, rahasi, in a quiet, secluded place, ekaki, alone. This yoga is not like singing Hare Krishna in a group. It's to be done alone, ekaki. When that mind turns in, nobody can come with you. You have to leave it all behind. You have to leave behind all the baggage. You have to leave behind this body, this mind, this ego, the guru, Vedanta. You have to leave it all behind. That sannyasi, ekaki yata chitatma, who's controlled himself, the mind that is running wild, this yogi, his mind is well controlled. That's called yata chitatma. He doesn't have any sense of, in that witness, there's no feeling of me or mine, my house. As the witness, there's no my house, my money, my car, this feeling of my makes me limited, because if this is my house, I don't own all the other houses. This very my is a limitation on my infinite nature. Me is a limitation on my infinite nature. Nirashi, he has no desire for any external thing. He only wants that. Nirashi, nirmama, he has no feeling of this is mine, because in the self there's no feeling of mine. The feeling that I own something or I don't own something or I have to abandon something or acquire something, that's the ego, not the self. So, Krishna gives a few instructions about how to do this in the beginning for beginners. People don't realize, they think that meditation means only when you're sitting in a particular, but to get it started as an aid, Krishna gives a couple of hints. He says, sit in a firm seat. He says, not too high or too low. You don't want to fall over in case you fall asleep. There, having made a comfortable seat in a clean place, in a secluded place, all alone, he says in 12, sitting on that seat and having made the mind one-pointed. On one-pointed on what? On that witnessing consciousness. Controlling all the activities of the mind. When the mind wants to wander out, grabbing it and bringing it back to that ever-present self. Controlling the activities of the senses and the mind. Let that practitioner of yoga, this is the real yoga, because it reveals the true nature of the self. And he should do this, and this is important. You see, even at this stage, the yogi, he's still doing something. He still has a mind. He's taking that mind, controlling it, and bringing it back to the self. By doing this, what happens to that mind? Atma Shuddhaye. The true meaning of a pure mind is a mind that's absorbed in that one reality. That mind that continuously bathes in the light of their own self, that mind that repeatedly does this constantly, Atma Shuddhaye, their minds become extremely pure through this meditation, if you can call it a meditation. I'll get more into the details. So giving some hints so that the mind won't wander, and people have noted that in the beginning as an aid to this, if the breath becomes somewhat equalized, the breath and the mind are connected. If you equalize the breath, the mind becomes quiet. You can try it. It automatically has an effect. So all of these are just outer aids to the real thing. So he says, with the mind tranquilized, all fear gone, established in the vow of living a life that is conducive to this. That's called brahmacharya. Brahmacharya doesn't mean, like they usually say, celibacy. Brahma achar, the behavior that takes us to Brahman, is called, to the supreme reality, is called brahmacharya. Firm in that vow of living a life that's conducive to that. Even a householder with a wife, with sex, can live a life of brahmacharya. It doesn't mean only celibacy. Brahmacharya vrate stitaha, controlling the mind. He should sit with me as his supreme goal, mat paraha. When Krishna says with me as the supreme goal, whenever you see the word mam, mat, me, you shouldn't think of some guy up in the sky with a beard that's looking down on us, me, the Lord. When Krishna says me, he means the self of everyone. With me, the self of everyone, the self of you, Arjuna, the self of you, the reader of the Gita, having that as the supreme, that's matpara. With me is supreme. He should engage in this uninterruptedly. That shows that it's this type of meditation is not, should I do it for an hour or then extend it to an hour and a half? And this is a thing that's going on all, there's no contradiction between this meditation and the life going on. In the beginning, find a quiet place, don't be disturbed, so that you can get the mind. But when this practice has become well established, when you get up off of the meditation seat, it doesn't stop. This is because he says, satatam, that this should be practiced continuously. That yogin wins peace. The fruit of this meditation is the peace, the happiness, the freedom that we've been searching for. This is the type that will lead directly. Karma yoga only purifies the mind. But this yoga, this dhyana yoga, you'll see what Krishna says. He attains shantim, the peace, not of the mind, but the peace that's the nature of the self. here Shantim doesn't mean a peaceful mind, because that'll be temporary. He attains Shantam Nirvanam Paramam, the supreme nirvana, the nirvana in which there's no more suffering. Nirvana Paramam. This is not the Buddhist nirvana. This Shantam, this peace, Matstanam, my state, me, the witnessing consciousness, Matstanam Adhigachati. He attains my state. That shows the yogi, through this practice, he attains the state of being the all-pervading reality. Matsnanam adhigachati. He attains my state. That's the fruit. If you meditate on a candle or a mantra or a form or stop all your thoughts, you won't attain eternal peace. But this yoga, the fruit of it is Shantim Pat Nirvanam Paramam Adhigachati. So then Krishna gives a couple of hints. Who is the yogi that can do this type of business? So he says, yoga is not for one who eats too much. If you want to have a mind fit for this, you can't be a glutton. The mind that's the person who stuffs his face with food all day is tamas. The mind becomes dull. Yoga, methinks, is not for one who eats too much, nor for one who doesn't eat at all. This is the middle way. Eating sufficient amount to keep the body healthy, to satisfy the appetite, but not for the mere gluttony of it. There'll be no yoga for a person like that. Nor for one who sleeps too much, sleeping all day, nor for one who doesn't sleep at all. Moderation. One who is proper in their eating and their sleeping, they can become a yogi. When the well-controlled mind abides solely in the self, when the well-controlled mind abides solely in the self, what does that mean? When the mind abides in the self, when it turns back and realizes the witnessing consciousness that pervades even the thoughts, that's called abides in the self. The mind merges into that, not just stopping your thoughts. You just stop your thoughts, you're in deep sleep. Here, the mind has to turn back to the witnessing consciousness, rejecting everything that's the object to that, and turning towards that, and merging into that. When the well-controlled mind abides solely in the self, rid of all cravings for the objects of desires. The mind doesn't want to enjoy the objects. It wants to get the bliss of its own self. It wants to taste the infinite bliss. There's a verse in the Gita that says, this practice is like poison in the beginning, because we think the happiness is outside. So turning away from the objects of desires is like poison. That which is like poison in the beginning, but which is like nectar in the end, when the mind begins to realize the true happiness that abides in their own self and gets a taste of that, the happiness that's to be derived from our very nature, that taste, because the mind always wants to go where the happiness is. That's the nature of the mind. If it thinks the happiness is outside, it pursues those. If it's decided there's no true happiness there, and finds that the real happiness, the real peace, the real freedom, the real fearlessness is in my own nature, then that mind loses cravings for the objects of desires. That person is said to be integrated, yukta. He's joined in yoga, the real yoga. How is his mind? What is this mind of a yogi? So it gives an example. As a lamp in a windless place, a lamp in a windless place where no wind is flicker. So if you had a lamp in a vacuum and it's just perfectly still, as a lamp in a windless place that's not stirring at all, this is the simile of the yogin's mind who is controlled and has applied himself to the yoga of the mind turned towards the one unchanging reality. He's become like a lamp in a windless place and went through the practice of this yoga. The motionless mind withdraws from all the objects and rejoices in the self, beholding the self as one's own inner self. He sees the true self as that inner self, the most behind the ego, and he rejoices. When the yogi experiences the endless bliss, he experiences endless bliss. Unlike the happiness that we get when we enjoy an object, which is in time, has a beginning, but the bliss of the self has no beginning. When he experiences the endless bliss, which is beyond the senses, and that may be grasped only by that mind, that intellect which has been purified through karma yoga, he becomes steadfast in that, and he doesn't move away from that. Even while everything is going on, he doesn't move away from that. That prize winning which he deems there's no greater prize, established in which that mind buried in that self, one is not overpowered by any grief or pain. In that witness, no pain can touch it, no pain can reach it. It's asanga, unattached, unaffected, ever the same, ever pure. So then Krishna gives the actual definition of this yoga. He says, know that to be yoga, which consists in the separation from pain. When the mind rejects all of the not self, right up to the ego, body, mind, senses, ego, and merges in the self, then the Sanskrit is tam vidyat, you should know, dukkha samyoga viyoga, the separation from our connection to pain. In our ignorance, we are yoked to pain. The pain of worry and suffering and fear of death and loss of possessions, this whole saga, that's called dukkha samyoga. Because I've taken myself to be something that I'm not, that's called joining myself with pain. And yoga is separating myself from that apparent pain. that I never had any pain. Seeing that is called separating yourself from the connection, the samyoga, the joining with pain. It's just a misconception. And through this yoga, we realize the self. We see the self directly. This self, you see the self directly. And then the very mind merges in that self. And that's yoga. Know that to be yoga. And this yoga has slowly to be practiced with an undejected mind. Because even for this yogin who's attained this stage, the mind is still has the tendency to go out. So even for this person, he must practice it with an undejected, that pure mind. There's still the tendency to be extrovert. When the yogin experiences this endless bliss beyond the senses, then he does not move away. Shanai Shanai Uparamet. So now I'm going to briefly tell you how to do this yoga. Shanai Shanai Uparamet. He should very slowly start with the body and see, is the body the subject or the object? What is it that knows the body? How do I know that I have a body? How do I know I have a body? Because I have senses. I can see my body, smell my body, taste. I have senses that, so the senses are more in, they objectify. Without the senses, you wouldn't even know you had a body. So you need the senses to know. So the senses of the more in, the knower, the more pervasive. So you should withdraw the body into the senses. And then to see that the senses are more external, more gross than the mind, which if the mind is away, the senses, even if they're on the objects, they're not known. So the knower of the senses is the mind. Take away the mind, there's no senses and no objects. So the real knower of them, that's called merging the objects into the senses, merging the senses into the mind by seeing what's more subtle, what's more in, what's more pervasive. More subtle, more in, more pervasive than even the mind, which is the mind that's thinking, worrying, is the discriminative faculty that decides whether the mind is correct or not. This is called the buddhi. We usually think the intellect is the one that knows the mind and decides about the mind. And even more in than that, the one who knows the intellect is I. That I is called the ahamkara, the I notion, who seems totally conscious. I am the conscious knower. At that stage, to see that that I is also known by something other than itself. That's called merging the ego into the witness. That's the culmination. Shanai, Shanai. You don't start with I'm not the ego. You start because the main identification is with the body. So you have to see what establishes the body. It's the senses. What establishes the senses? It's the mind. What establishes the mind? It's the ego. What establishes the ego? It's the witness. What establishes the witness? Nothing. The witness is self-established. It doesn't need another light. The ego needs the witness, but the witness doesn't need anything. It's self-established. This is the yoga, abiding in that. And then, and this is not to be done quickly. to see the truth of it. This is discrimination. It's not to be believed. To see the fact of it, that the body is established only on the authority of the senses, and the senses is on the mind. Well, who's the real knower? So by dismissing what's known and moving back to, and dismissing that as known and moving, and finally moving back to the witness in a very slow, clear, discriminative process, uparamate, shanai, shanai, going back. The yogin should bring the fickle mind and a steady mind under the sole control of the self, withdrawing it from all causes whatsoever that make it sally forth. Indeed, the bliss supreme accrues to this yogin whose mind has been stilled and who has become Brahman. When the mind merges in that, you've become Brahman. This is the Gita. When the yogin, through this practice, abides as that, he's become Brahman. Thus integrating himself always, this sinless yogin easily achieves that contact with Brahman, or infinite bliss. Contact with Brahman means merging in that. Making contact with that only means being that. And that's called the infinite bliss. That yogin, when he sees the self everywhere. He sees the self, he says it, with equality of vision everywhere. He whose inner sense has been attuned to yoga, he beholds the self in all beings. That witnessing consciousness, which pervades everything that appears, sentient or insentient, so-called sentient and so-called insentient. He pervades everything that appears. He sees himself in everything and everything in himself. That yogin beholds the self in all beings and all beings in himself. That's the fruit of this yoga. If you merely stop your thoughts, you won't see all beings in yourself or yourself in all beings. If you meditate on a mantra, this yogin, who's through karma yoga and discrimination, has got to this stage, this is the fruit. He sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings. And then Arjuna asked a question about this yoga. I'll just mention this, which is, hey Krishna, I see what you're talking about here, but the mind is so powerful. It doesn't allow me to do this. It goes out in a million directions. The mind indeed is fickle, O Krishna, and so hard and powerful. I deem its control as extremely difficult as that of controlling the wind. Means it seems impossible. Krishna says, Asam Shayam, it is true. Without a doubt, the mind is most difficult to control. Dor Nigraham, it's very difficult to bring it under control because it wants to go out. It's changing. But abhyasena varagyacha. But by these two means, repeated practice of this, abhyasena, by repeatedly, through discrimination. This is not like bringing the mind in just through like an effort, but by seeing what is out and what pervades it. What pervades that? Seeing, it's a discriminative meditation. Seeing the fact of it. What is the consciousness that pervades everything? By this practice, that's called abhyasena and vairagyena, by dispassion. If the mind is filled with passion to desire the outside things, if there's no dispassion, a loss of interest, a conviction that those things are secondary, they can't bring me this infinite happiness, that's called vairagya. If a person has that characteristic, filled with dispassion for accumulating, and by the repeated practice of this, the mind, Krishna says, it can be brought under control. He says, but for the man who has no control, this yoga is impossible. If he hasn't done the karma yoga, which produces vairagya and produces one-pointedness, if he's not controlled his mind, this yoga is dushprapya. It's very difficult to attain, sarcastically, he says. So this is, in the briefest time that I could say it, the steps of the yoga is do the action, make the mind sattvic by not attached to the fruit, and then get over the sattva by not being attached to any part of the action. Once the mind is freed up by the repeated practice of this discrimination, bringing the mind back to that and abiding in that yogi, through that practice, he gets to see all beings in himself and himself in all beings. That's the fruit of yoga. In the Upanishads, it says this teaching has to be heard about. If you've heard this teaching, you are that, and you've understood it in your own experience, you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to do this meditation. You don't have to reflect on anything. In fact, if you realize I am that, there's no chance that you could even want to do or could do any of this. For the person who's heard this teaching, but there's no fruit, then the next stage, to get the fruit, you can reflect on the teaching. If merely by reflecting on what you've heard, you can realize I am that, then you don't have to do this meditation. For the person who's heard about this and they've reflected on this, but still there's doubts, who am I? To see the self directly, this is called nididhyasana or dhyana yoga. This continuous practice, abhyasena, filled with dispassion, with a pure mind filled with discrimination. That yogi, he attains the infinite bliss. He attains the contact with Brahman, meaning just like in deep sleep, we become one with that contact with Brahman when all the misconceptions are gone. And that's, to get to that stage, this is the sadhana of the Bhagavad Gita. You could see how difficult this would be for people who haven't the preparation through karma yoga. So, if you remember, the Bhagavad Gita's teaching starts in 2:11. Asochanam vasochistvam. You grieve where you should grieve not. Why? Because you don't know the self. When you know the self, you won't grieve for anyone, Arjuna. The final teaching of the Bhagavad, it begins there. You have to know the self. When you know the self, all grieving will come to an end, all suffering. In the 18th chapter, the 66th verse is the culmination and the finish. The teaching begins in 2:11, it ends in 1866. And this is a very important verse. It says, Sarva dharma parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. This is the culmination. Sarva papebhyaha aham vimoksha yishami masucha. That's 1866. And what it says is, this is the culmination of the whole teaching, Arjuna. Arjuna, I'm going to sum up. Here's my advice to you. Sarva dharma parityaga. Give up all other religions. Give up all other dharmas. Give up dharma, give up adharma. Parityaga, that means completely abandon. Sarva dharma. Give up bhakti. Give up practice. Give up religion. Give up beliefs. Give up everything. Sarva dharma parityaja. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. And take refuge in oneness with me. Give up everything else, Arjuna. Give up all not self. And take refuge in oneness with me. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. If you do this, Arjuna, you'll be released from all sin. When you take refuge in me by giving up all not self, that's what means refuge in me. When you give up all not self, you are that supreme being. That's Mam Ekam, oneness with me, by giving up all not self. Sarva dharma parityaga, Mam Ekam sharanam vraja. You will be released from all sins by taking refuge in oneness with me. Ma suchaha, don't grieve. Begins with don't grieve, 1866. If you give up all not self and take refuge in oneness with me who is unborn, unchanging, ever present, ever shining, free from fear, free from old age, sickness, and death. If you take refuge in me, oneness with me, that supreme reality, Ma Suchaha, you won't have to grieve. It starts with don't grieve. It ends with don't grieve. The good news of the Gita is not that Jesus Christ died for your sins. The good news of the Gita is you are that. That's the good news. The good news that frees you is not that there's a God up there that's waiting to punish you or take you to heaven. The good news is that if you give up your ignorance of identifying with the not self, which is not your nature, and you take refuge in your true self, Mam Ekam Sharanam, then there'll be no sin for you. You'd be freed from all sin. What is the sin? The sin of having a body. The sin of natural greed, naturally coveting, jealousy. All of that you'll be freed from if you take refuge in me, Arjuna. How do you do that? By giving up all not self. How do you give up all not self? Through discrimination. That's the culmination of the Bhagavad Gita. All the sadhanas to take you to that stage where you become one with that. Take refuge in that. Myself is my only refuge. There is no other refuge. If I take refuge in the not self, I'm immortal. If I take refuge in my own true nature, I've become immortal. This is the final teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. All through it talks about the sadhanas, the spiritual practices. What are the meditations? Not this meditation, but other meditations are taught in the Gita, all to purify your mind. What is that bhakti bhav, that feeling of devotion, that falling in love, that makes you qualified to finally give up everything else and take refuge in that alone? That's the teaching of the Gita. The more you study it, it's like an onion. It reveals deeper and deeper meanings. Nobody can say they understand the Gita. It's a very challenging book. If it's read wrongly, it seems like a religious text or a yogic text or a Samkhya text. If people know it, Samkhya is a philosophy in India that separates the self and the not self, but the not self is real. If you don't understand the text properly, you can read into it theism, you can read into it a text that teaches you how to make money, how the Gita helps you. The Gita puts an end. It doesn't make your life better. It puts an end to samsara. Ma mekam sharanam vraja. When you're one with that, it puts an end to the whole birth, death, everything. That's the purpose of the Gita, not to make your life better. Life is the problem. Seeing that I was never born, never dying is the solution. Not desiring it or believing it as an article of faith. But when you reject all of the not self, because you see that it's an object, that it appears in your consciousness, that it disappears in your consciousness, that's the fact. That when something appears, you don't change. When something disappears, you don't change. You're not replaced by anything. When the waking comes, you're still deep sleep. Waking doesn't change your nature. When it goes away, you're still deep sleep. Your nature's always the same. But we're identified with what's appearing and disappearing. This ignorance, the Gita, through graduated steps, how to make the mind pure enough, how to get the desire for that, how to discriminate the witness from the witness, the kshetra from the kshetrajna, how to perform all of your actions to make it a spiritual life so that it sanctifies, purifies, has an actual utility, because only in a pure mind does this knowledge arise. When you realize I am that, you'll be that. That's how pure the mind has to be. When the mind is thick with ignorance, you'll read the teaching and think, oh, I know the self. I know the self. I'm the witness. That'll take you nowhere. You don't know anything. You are the self. That's called Ma Mekam Sharanam Vraja. Take refuge in me alone, not in the not self. When you don't identify with this ego, the world won't appear to you. That's a very important point. When you don't identify with the ego, because without an ego, who sees the world? It's the ego that's the seer. The self doesn't see anything. The self has no mind, no senses. It doesn't. It's only a light. So this is the practical Vedanta, to take you to that stage. It's very different than Neo-Vedanta, where you know the self and then get established. Here, you first make the mind fit enough, and when you know the self, you won't grieve anymore. There'll be no more samsara. If the suffering is continuing, you don't know the self. Even if you say the suffering's not real, it doesn't help you. Just being aware of the suffering is the problem. When the ignorance is gone, you won't be aware of any suffering, like in deep sleep. Okay, so of course, this was just an overview of the Gita. I tried to hit the main points and it'll have to suffice. This is really not the way to study the text in depth. If you look at Swami Prabodhananda, then you'll see how it's traditionally done. Each word, he over and over from different angles. Then the text opens up deeper and deeper meanings for you. You have to get a love for the Gita. Spend some time with it. But it's difficult. You really have to study it with a teacher. But we can do the best we can on our own. And I think with this outline, there may be some assistance. So if anybody has any questions about this, comments, I want to thank Paul and Evelyn so much for giving me this opportunity to share with you these ideas. I'm so thankful that they are always interested in non-dual teachings and keep it going. I'm so happy that they have such a thing and that they allow me to participate with them. So thank you once again. And thank you for everyone who's stuck through these 5 classes. Maybe we'll see you in the future, I'm sure, somewhere. So any comments? If there's a strong question, put it in the YouTube comment thing. I'll see if I can reply to some of them. I'm going to end this with the traditional mantra, and I wish you all stay safe. We're going to have a vaccine soon. Here we go. That reality which is the witnessing consciousness in you is full. That because of ignorance appears as this duality is also full. If you take this false duality away, that fullness still remains. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om.
Go ahead.